Thank you for tuning in to another edition of the Business of Fun podcast. I'm your host, Dave Wakeman. Today's episode is brought to you by my good friends at Booking Protect, the worldwide leader in refund protection. Any listing, any sector, anywhere, Booking Protect has you covered with the world's most comprehensive refund protection product. To find out how you and your organization can partner with Booking Protect to deliver a better buying experience to your customers, more peace of mind in their purchases, and how you and the organization can create a brand new stream of revenue for your business, visit www.bookingprotect.com. Once again, that's www.bookingprotect.com, the global leaders in refund protection. Now, I'm back from my trip to Intix, and hopefully I saw a lot of you because there was a lot of people who were waving their podcast apps in front of me saying, I listened to your podcast and I dig it, which is awesome because if I've never shared with you before, I started the podcast not knowing exactly what would happen. So the reception and the positive feedback is fantastic. I had a few bookkeeping note and ideas I wanted to share with you before I got into the guest today, who is Jason Maglantay from the Canadian Football League. We have a great conversation. We talk about marketing. We talk about culture. We talk about building trust with people who might have every reason in the world to be apprehensive about what you're trying to do and the change you're trying to create. We talk about the challenges of selling and marketing tickets in a gate-driven league. We talk about how to create and share best practices across many, many, many markets. With the Canadian Football League, it's not a huge league, but the diversity of markets is great, and that presents some tremendous challenges as far as passing along best practices. We talk about selling to fans the way they want to. We talk about the unique culture of the Canadian Football League. We talk about the millennial fan experience and how the Canadian Football League has been very, very, very successful in growing millennial fans and younger fans and keeping a vibrant and sustainable fan base. We cover really a lot of stuff. I mean, I have like 4 pages of notes from our conversation. Jason is somebody that I have known for several years since he was working on tennis in Canada, and it's a really good conversation. But before I get you to that, I wanted to share a few other ideas with you, maybe get some feedback from you, and get some suggestions about what to do going forward. So the first thing is over the next couple weeks, as I've returned from Intix, I learned a lot, met some really great people. Some of the people are going to come on the podcast in the next couple weeks. But I want to try to focus a little bit more on how-to stuff, which is what I found while I was at Intix, was that there's some really great solutions, right? And there's people who, on the primary and the content producer side, who want to create change. They want to do business better. Sometimes, though, the path to change is not clear. And so what I want to do over the next couple weeks is I want to spend some time talking with people who can help us through the how-to part of this, help us understand, how to create change in an organization, how to advocate for change, what the process of changing your processes will look like, what success would look like, what some of the milestones for success will be, a lot of stuff like that, especially as it relates to sales and marketing and branding, which is stuff that I deal with all the time, strategy, obviously, and a lot of bottom of funnel things. So if you have ideas, questions, concerns, things that you're struggling with and you want to learn more about, please send me an email. It's my name. It's Dave at davewakeman.com. Put whatever subject line you want to in there. You can say podcast. You can say any kind of thing. Feel free, right? The second thing is I want you to know that I don't take your support of the podcast for granted. Last month, we had just tremendous, which would be January of 2019, tremendous growth in the podcast. It means we had several thousand, somewhere between close to 3,000 downloads, streams, and other forms, which is a crazy number for me to think about and believe. If you like the podcast, if you're new here, you're old here, you've been here the whole way through, I'd love it if you had a moment you could subscribe. We're on iTunes, we're on Stitcher, we're on many of the platform podcasts, and rate it. Share it with some of your friends and your colleagues. You know, any little bit. Post about it on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn or wherever. You know, connect with me, whatever the thing is. This means so much to me. Your support, the fact that you're listening and paying attention to this podcast is just unbelievable. And by subscribing and rating it, allows other people, and sharing it, it allows other people to discover it and make sure that we continue to do some really great stuff, deliver some really great content for you, and you get a lot of these new ideas. The final thing I want to bring up is I do a weekly newsletter. It's called The Business of Value, where I talk about all things about how to generate revenue. Sometimes it takes big picture stuff about organizations and market demands. Other times it's a little bit more personal. It's probably the most personal thing that I do. I write it most of the time specifically pointed at either what would I want to say if I was sitting down and talking to my friend Don, who is the guy who came up with the Revenue Architect brand for me, or my friend Simon, the CEO of Booking Protect. And so it's like really, really like the most personal and hopefully high impact thing I do most weeks. And if you're interested in getting it, you can email me again. My name, dave@davewakeman.com, and I'll happily put you on that list. And you just put newsletter in the subject line. Finally, as we get ready to turn over the conversation to me and between me and Jason, I just want to take one more second to thank you for being here. I learned a lot at Intix. I met a lot of you. It was like one of the coolest things to have people like wave the podcast in front of me. I learned a lot. If you didn't get a chance to talk to me, or you didn't, you still have something to say, I'm easy to find. Always reach out and connect with me. I love to hear from you. I love to connect with you. And I love the fact that you spend so much time listening. So now that I have spent far too much time talking about myself and what I'm doing, I'll turn it over to me and my conversation with Jason Maglantay from the Canadian Football League on the Business of Fun podcast. I want to welcome Jason Maglantay to the Business of Fun podcast. Jason, what's happening?
Oh, all is good. All is good up north of the border here. It's kind of chilly as we are in the winter season, but all is happy and all is good.
If it makes you feel any better, right now, as we're recording this thing, it is cold, and there is tons of snow on the ground in D.C. too. So, you don't feel alone in this battle against winter. And there's a huge storm coming this way, I think, for this weekend too. So forget about it.
I'll tell you, Dave. Well, first of all, I want to appreciate you having me on. The other part of it is I'm, as part of my role, we got to visit our Canadian Football League teams, and I'm off to Winnipeg, Manitoba tomorrow to visit our Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And the forecast temperature is minus 26 degrees Celsius. I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit, but
I'll tell you what it is.
I checked my closet. I checked my closet today, and I'm like, what? I don't even have anything that. What should I wear for minus 26 degrees Celsius weather?
Yeah, but you're Canadian, don't you have one of the, what do they call those, Canadian goose jackets or whatever the things are, that became hip and fashionable in the States where it's not nearly that cold?
It's definitely fashionable, and it's definitely one of those things, but I don't think any clothing attire will help repel minus 26 degrees.
No, I don't know what will. I mean, that's the coldest I think I've ever heard. Somebody I know going to. That's great. Now, let me introduce people to you in case they don't know who you are. But you work for the Canadian Football League, and you are in charge of. Will you explain your role? Don't let me do it. You talk.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was brought in to the Canadian Football League. I've been here for close to a year now. And my role is part of the leading the team services business from the league office and developing ticketing strategies to help our teams win in the sales and ticketing front, specifically ticketing club seats and suites and premium. So that's my role right now. And I'm actually joined to the hip with my data team. So I work with my data team who is providing all the insights and data that I look at and create the best strategy I can for the specific markets we serve and the teams we serve to help them sell better.
And what's interesting about your job is that you came into the league at a really pretty
a time when the league lacked a little bit of stability. There had been a lot of turnover in leadership, and it had created a sense of uncertainty in the league. I think would that be fair to say? Like people just were kind of like unsure what was going to happen. Is that a fair statement, or am I off course there?
I don't think you're a little bit off course, Dave. But I would say there has been some leadership changes recently. I mean, our commissioner Randy Ambrosi has been here for just over a year as well. He's very, very, very good for the job, I would say. I think the board of governors have done a really good job of hiring the right person to take the league further.
Yep.
I've entered at a point where not necessarily turnover, but there was different focuses for the Canadian Football League before I started. A lot of the focus was on media rights and marketing in support of corporate partnerships at a league level and helping the teams drive revenues on those standpoints, and of course helping the health of the league and the brand of the league, not just in Canada, but a little bit south of the border, as we have a lot of our player rosters is made up from players from the United States. But what I would say is that they brought me in to look at ticketing sales. Now, we are a gate-driven league as compared to other leagues who rely on a lot of, or not rely, but do have revenue streams that offset some of their operating costs in terms of media rights values as well as corporate partnership values. But from a league perspective, I mean, I would say that there was not a lack of focus, but there was a sidetrack focus for specifically ticket sales and what ticket sales strategies and best practices and sharing across team to team and across the league. So I think I came in here to add value to the league based on my expertise of how I've been working with ticket sales for the past 20 years based on my other career positions.
Yeah, and thank you for that, because I was maybe, I knew that the commissioner had changed, and then that wasn't like, that was creating a little bit of a tension, and so I was like, I don't know if I want to call it unstable or uncertain, but that it was really a change in focus, and it became and it's really driven around. Obviously, if you're a gate driven league, you need to sell tickets, right? And that's a very valuable thing. And I think one of the things that has been interesting to learn as you've gone through this, because I think we've been kind of talking pretty regularly throughout the time you've been with the CFL, is about the process of building trust with all the teams you're working with, right? Because anytime any organization, doesn't matter if it's sports or theater or technology, any organization, when there's change, there's a little bit of uncertainty because everybody is reluctant to change. I mean, it's just built into our DNA, our genetics, right? That's how we made it from cavemen to, Homo sapiens, is through evolution and being cautious about things. So, and like one of the interesting things is your journey to build trust with the teams you work with, and then help instill best practices that the teams can use to drive ticket sales in all the different markets, because Toronto's one market and Manitoba is another market, right? And then you have Vancouver and you have all these different markets where the best practices, some of them are going to get passed down and work the same or relatively similarly in different markets, where other ones are going to be completely like, well, this is what we do here, but your mileage may vary and it might not work as effectively there.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about this process?
Absolutely. I mean, Dave, you make a big point, and let's rewind that a little bit. I think one of the things that, for my key learnings in building those relationships and trust with the teams is, I think they were really forthcoming with the change of focus, or relooking focus at ticket sales from years past at the league as I come into play. So that's one of the processes, obviously, is establishing the trust. Sharing best practices across different markets. I mean, it's interesting enough that you bring that up, because in Canada, we're very unique and we're very well positioned in that way. What I mean by that is each market is, we talk about diversity in Canada, and each market is very diverse. There's not a one best practice that suits all markets. There's best practices that can be shared to our like markets, which is pretty similar to all major leagues. But Canada is unique in a way that, I think the way our Canadian Football League fans are, and how they are set up and how they behave and how they consume CFL football, it's pretty similar across the board, across all 9 markets. So there is a way where best practices shared across teams do work, but it's my job to analyze those best practices using, working closely with the data and working closely with their teams to see if it does fit in that specific market. And like you said, some work, some don't. I think it comes down to the people within those teams to help me understand and collaborate to understand their market in full. And I think one of the things that we're learning and understanding is, our markets, our biggest markets, Toronto, Montreal, and BC, they are, I would say, in a state where they do need a little bit more help from a league standpoint. But then we have other teams, like you said, in Winnipeg, in Manitoba, in Edmonton, in Saskatchewan, actually, is one of the most valuable teams that we have, not just in professional sports in Canadian Football League, but I think in North America. So there's a lot of dynamics. There's a lot of personalities that from a league office and where I fit in is establishing that trust and understanding those markets to the point where the best practice being shared across the 9 markets. It's my job to make sure and understand and work collaboratively with each team to see if those work and if they don't work. But it is a process, Dave. In all sense of the word, all 9 teams want all 9 teams to be healthy, and we all want to drive ticket sales revenue. So, in terms of trust and process, we share as much as we can, as often as we can.
Well, let me ask you this, because that was a really good, great answer, actually. That opens up a lot of doors to explore. The first thing is like you said, in all 9 markets, there's some things that really just work very well across the markets, and then like you said, also some things that just have to be completely individualized. What are a couple of the things that you found that specifically work in all 9 markets? Because maybe that'll be informative to people who are listening wherever they're listening to this.
Well, one of the things that we've established from a league perspective is specific theme games that work in market. For example, a couple of years ago, we've launched Thursday night football theme games and family day theme games. We've also play on each market in each city that we serve. It's very diverse, so we have a brand play, a brand push of diversity and strength is one of our major. I want to say slogan, but it's a major cultural language that we use at the Canadian Football League across all 9 teams is with diversity is strength. And we push inclusion, and we work with strategic partners across each market that makes sense. One of them is You Can Play, which is a organization that helps with LGBT communities across all 9 markets. So these are the type of best practices that we look at that serve each market, and we've seen good success. Some markets we see more of a lift than others, but the message in terms of fandom to these theme games have become really positive and worked in all 9 markets.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's number one, that they're consistent, right? But then number two, it's that they really set a positive message, right? And I know most sports try to push a positive message, especially when it comes to the themes like diversity and inclusion and things like this. But and I still think that it needs to be highlighted, and when it turns out well, it's very important, and I think it sets a great example. So that's awesome to hear. The other thing that I found interesting from your previous answer was the idea that the biggest markets also seem to maybe need a little bit more help from the league office.
Yep. And, for sure.
And I have a hypothesis, but I'd be curious to hear, what you found that has created that need.
I think, we can look at several variables for this. I think part of it, yes, I think we can point at the obvious, which is market competition. In those 3 markets, we've had a lot of sports and entertainment properties enter the marketplace, which sucks up the entertainment dollar and obviously offering a lot of the market choice of where to spend their dollars. So that's probably one that we would probably look at. And I think we need to do a better job as a league to enhance the experiences to stay competitive and be different and establish a different position within those major markets to our competitors. And that's what we're doing right now as a league. And that's where, again, I'll go to point that back to data, is really understanding our fans and how do we amplify their experience in those three markets, Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, or the BC Lions. I think that's our first step, and that's what we're really, really focused on. So I'm intrigued, Dave, about your hypothesis. We'll start there, but I would like to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Well, obviously, you point out the obvious one was market competition. That's going to be obviously in play because there's just more people, which is a challenge teams in the U.S. are dealing with a lot. The second thing that I would figure as far as challenges in the bigger market is, and it's a play on the more competition. It's that because of more competition for the entertainment dollar, a lot of times you'll find that teams and organizations are pulled towards what everybody else is doing in their market. Not because it's effective, but because it's what everybody else is doing. And does that make sense? Because, you see like somebody's marketing their product or service or their experience in a certain way. So you end up maybe falsely making the assumption that must be the right way to do it, especially if you haven't had maybe the data or taken a step back to look at it effectively to be like, well, does this really make sense? And I see that in a lot of big cities where just because everybody else is doing it this way, then that must be the right way to do it. And I don't know if that makes sense or if that's even played out in the data that you guys have uncovered.
David, it's a great discussion point. And, when you see in these marketplaces, I will agree with you to disagree with you with that, because it is true. I think a lot of if you look at some of the marketing and some of what our teams are doing, it's pretty, I wouldn't say similar, but there's some nuances that the Canadian Football League from a league office that we advise and try to work collaboratively with those teams to what sort of the message or what sort of the experiences we want to promote. And I think what we're doing right now, what my role is, and going back to working with our internal teams and collaborating with those three big markets, is we are uncovering sort of what you're talking about. Is there are similarities to how the message is working out in terms of the entertainment factor that you go to a Canadian Football League, because compared to the other sports and entertainment events that consumers can pay their money towards. But I think we've done a very good job of not only maintaining what the Canadian Football League stands for in terms of those three markets, but acquiring new fans. And I'll go back to theme games and I know a lot of other teams and leagues do that, but we've created a fan experience where we've identified some of the fans that go to our games and just amplify in those markets. And then what I say is that a lot of people, when they look at the Canadian Football League, they think we're the grandfather league. We're actually not. Based on the last couple of years of fan research and ticket buyer research, we've actually uncovered that we're actually a millennial fan experience. So we've already tapped into the younger demographic based on our fan experience studies, and they're coming to our games and enjoying our experiences versus the perception in the marketplace that we're the grandfather league. So I hope that answers your questions a little bit, Dave, but I think that's where we're focused on, and I think we've drawn some really good success.
Oh, yeah, no, and that's interesting that you are actually, that there's a disconnect between what you are, which is the millennial fan experience, right? You've been successful at tapping into that, because I know that for most people, that seems to be a question that's on their mind. And then, but the perception is that you're a grandfather league.
Yeah.
I guess number one is like, besides the experiences, how have you discovered why you've been successful besides the experiences, as far as like the messaging you've given to people, to the millennials, or the way you're selling tickets to them, and encouraging them to attend? And how are you shifting the perception that, you are the grandfather league, when in reality, the fan base is much younger than it would seem like, just from perception?
I think it comes from what you and I talked about this a little bit, is I think with working with our teams and collaborating with I truly believe we have the right people in place. in delivering the message, based if it's on the phone. Our ticket sales teams are clear about, we provide that fan information to the ticket sales teams so they can go out there, deliver the right message, and target the right audience. We've done a really good job as a league level to really look internally from each team to see if we have the right people in place and making sure we're delivering this consistent message across the board. I think that you and I talked about this in a little bit, is that, that's where the ticket sales, from my perspective, from my lens, is working, and where the success is that we've established a consistent message across what the Canadian Football League audience is and how the fan profile looks like based on our research. And we were able to deliver that message to the ticket sales team so they could disseminate to our fans and acquire and deliver that fan experience, and targeting the right people, not necessarily the grandfather, but understanding that, the way you talk, the way you speak, the way you interact with all the fans, is that we are a young league. We are a vibrant entertainment experience. We're not the grandfather league that people perceive. That's part of our fan segment, but it's not where the growth is coming from and where we're seeing the most success.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because it would seem that, if you're young and diverse and, you're checking a lot of these boxes, that also some of the other factors that are at play here would change as well, right? Like, it would seem that the story would be told more readily that, hey, look, the Canadian Football League is doing this, this, and this because they're a young, diverse crowd here. Because usually that attracts a story, right? Like the news wants to cover it, advertisers want to be a part of it, the whole thing. So usually it seems like just that fact would drag the attention and the perception along. So it's really interesting that you're still having to work at changing the perception that it's a grandfather league. And I would add, though, that the one thing is it's really a great thing to be considered as young and hip, because think about some of our most popular products that even old timers like me use Macs and iPhones, but all the branding and the perception on, for the most part over the last decade or more has been young and hip. So you're not excluding your older demographics. You're probably even encouraging them, because who doesn't want to feel hip and young for the most part?
And I agree. That's part of it too, David. You make a great point. We do have those long-standing fans, and I think I should bring this to a point. We are the Canadian Football League, and a lot of it there's some patriotism to support our Canadian Football League teams in those big markets. We just finished having our Grey Cup this past November, and I believe it's the only national championship for professional sports leagues where you have every team represented during our fan festival. And that is truly unique of what the Canadian Football League is about and where our success comes from. We had Calgary, versus Ottawa at our Grey Cup this year, but every fan from every team was represented at the game. And they're wearing their home jerseys. You had Montreal jerseys in the crowd. You had Winnipeg jerseys in the crowd. You had BC. It is one of the most unique things that I've seen and what I've experienced, lucky enough, that's very different than any other sports property that I know of. And that's part of our success in some of the major markets, is that it is truly a Canadian, how do you define that? But it's a Canadian experience. And it's unique to that. And that's another story that we push a lot. And then we've attracted a lot of the younger Canadians and first generation Canadians, being with our diversity message as well, that's really drawn people to games at in Canadian Football League experience. So that's another thing that I should have highlighted that is really, really predominant with this. And we talk about stories, if you're a visitor at a Canadian, in any of our Canadian markets, what they say is, if you want to feel the Canadian in culture or in the city that we serve, you have to go to the Canadian Football League, because you'll see what Canada is about.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I would not have known that there was such patriotism attached to going to the Canadian Football League games. And I know it's it's a hard thing to pinpoint, right? But what exactly do you think it is that drives that? Because, and I'll give you a little bit of a basis on this, so you can maybe I was recently read Soccernomics, which is the kind of like the Freakonomics for soccer, and it was talking about English football fans being are they lifers, right? And the data came back and said that no, they're like people move through life cycles as fans, and there's a core group who are going to be, and in this term, it's like they were named them after Nick Hornby, the writer who wrote Fever Pitch, called them Hornbys, and then that like throughout people's lives, their affection and their attendance and their attention to a sport or a team will wax and wane, and then there's like a lot of fluidity between whether or not you're a fan of Tottenham like I am, or if you follow a different team depending on how the team's doing. And hearing that there's so much patriotism and so much connection to the Canadian Football League and to the teams, what do you hang the success of that on? Because that is something that I think people are, especially like all over the world, are looking for, is like to develop a sense of patriotism around their team, right? And like a deep long-term connection, which was kind of how I grew up in sports.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where we're one of the longest. We're one of the oldest sports leagues in North America. The Grey Cup is turning 107 years old. And there's you talk about a grandfather league, yes, but what we've done is really well. It's just based each team has their own traditions, and those traditions have been passed on as not only just a team tradition, but a Canadian Football League tradition, year after year after year. So now we've captured a lot of that tradition and quote unquote made it cool based on how the sports entertainment world has changed as fast and rapidly as we've stayed steadfast in some of our traditions, with the same thing as celebrating those traditions, but also reinventing ourselves to attract the younger generation. So I think that's very important of what we do. We've steadfast in a lot of the Canadian Football League traditions, and all the teams have consistently done that. At the same time, is reinventing ourselves year after year, attracting to make sure those traditions are passed to younger generations, but also accommodating those younger generations with new experiences and new technology, and working collaboratively. So that is what's one of the things that I know that our teams do a really good job is that we don't steer away from Canadian Football League traditions. And like I go back to the Grey Cup, like I can tell you, and you might jump on this as well, based on your experiences on national championships. You have every team jersey present at our national championship. I don't think you can say that for any other league.
No, I don't. I mean, to an extent, you probably get that at the Super Bowl, but that's because the Super Bowl, is much like the Grey Cup, is a destination event. But yeah, you don't necessarily see it as much. And what you did mention about the traditions, and even in the face of such rapid change and changing technology, changing consumer tastes, you still manage to maintain those traditions, which I think is important because, I mean, you're no stranger to me. We've known each other. I talk about this all the time as like the story, the traditions are part of the storytelling of the team and the league, right? Yes. And it becomes pretty easy in the face of change, right? Well, we're not going to call it rapid change because I think rapid change has always been the case, right? It's just it seems more fast now because we have more information at our fingertips.
I agree. Yep.
Yeah. See, the people are going to laugh at us now. But how do you stand so strong in making sure those traditions remain in place? Because a lot of organizations and a lot of teams and leagues and buildings and all over the world struggle with this. But yet I've always viewed it as an essential part of creating continuity and stability in your business. And you guys have been successful doing that.
Well, I think you nailed it right there, Davis. That you need to have continuity to tell a really captivating story, right? Like one of those things where I talk to teams consistently, and they promote and they talk about what the fan experience is going to look like to a new fan or to their current fans and their long-withstanding fans. What makes our team successful for the most part is that we have a lot of long-withstanding fans and become ambassadors. And I think our teams have done a really good job of recognizing these ambassadors within the marketplace to really help promote the tradition and the stories of the team and the Canadian Football League to new Canadians or to their extended families, to kids, or to other people in the marketplace. We have a lot of ambassadors because of the traditions that we hold true. And as you know, how teams or leagues operate, you have to have a consistent message in the marketplace to be successful. And if you start deviating or changing, but that's who you are. You have to stick to who you are. To what we talked about before, going back to what you're saying, is that people look at something that's what they're doing, so we should be doing that as well. But we pride ourselves to say, well, the Canadian Football League is this story. We're not going to deviate from that. We're going to tell the consistent story, and that's what makes us successful, is making sure that our traditions are met and told. And we have done a really good job with all our teams is amplifying those traditions and amplifying the consistent message of what the Canadian Football League is all about, and not deviating too much, but making sure that we are tweaking a few things to maintain. Well, obviously we have to maintain and excel in the business markets that we serve. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think one of the things that is really important here at the Canadian Football League with our teams is that we do have storied traditions, and those stories resonate within the marketplace.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great answer, because number one, it highlights a couple things, and you tell me if I'm wrong here, which is that traditional doesn't have to mean stuck in time. It doesn't have to mean stayed, right? It doesn't have to mean disconnected with the world that we live in now. It's just, this is who we are. This is what we do, right? I always have said, like, some of the best brands in sports are, they're still, they have tradition. But they still feel fresh, right? Like the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think that they have a certain distinction in their brand, right? That's like stands out, right? And it translates even to the way they play. And you see that because, they don't churn through, their staff is consistent. Their coaching staff is consistent, right? Their ownership has been consistent. There's a consistency there. And I think that's really important, and it doesn't mean that it's, stuck in the mud, right? Alabama, I went to Alabama. We were talking about this before we started podcasting, right? Yeah. Alabama's as traditional as it gets, yet it's very modern, right? In the same way. Everything still revolves around, Alabama going west to win the Rose Bowl in the 20s, when, teams from the South weren't viewed as being very successful, on through Bear Bryant, in the 70s and 80s, on to Nick Saban. But, it's the same but different, and I think that's really important, because I feel all too often teams and leagues are willing to throw their traditions away in the need to try to feel fresh. But the thing is but when you throw away these traditions, you are throwing away the essence of your brand that you've built decades and decades and decades building, if you've been doing it well, right? It's like another example to me is like the Boston Red Sox, right? They were like the Cubs, lovable losers, but both of these teams have won, yet they still maintain their brand integrity. And I think it's important, because you can still have tradition and still be fresh. And that's what it seems like you capture.
And I agree with you, because, that's what makes us unique in the marketplace. And we talked about how do we differentiate ourselves, and how do we look for growth. But at the same time, that's what makes us so unique. And the 3-down football and the fan experiences and the traditions, and that's what makes us unique. And we can't deviate that from too much. We can tweak a few things and add to the brand and nuances, but in the end, like you said, it's like the consistency of what we represent needs to be amplified, because our traditions are very important to the Canadian Football League, and that's what makes us unique. That's what draws people to our games, and it's more of a celebration of being Canadian. And I think when people talk about Canada, and we just talked about this earlier about weather, and people talk about hockey in Canada, but at the same time, Canadian football in the markets that we serve thrives because of those traditions, and it does make us unique, and it does make us special. And if we deviate from that too much, then your fans and your consumers can see right through you that you're trying to change and you're not being true and being authentic, and that's when you're going to lose your fans or not attract the fans. If you're not being authentic and you're not sticking to your traditional brand and your messaging, fans are too smart these days. If you're not being authentic, they know right away that they're not going to support you.
Yeah, and I have no information, no data to back this up, but I'm going to make a guess here. And my guess is that at some point, too, I'm sure there's been market research or consultants or people. I'm not disparaging consultants because I am one.
Of course.
But that have
I am one too now. I am one too in this role.
Yeah. Right, exactly. But have come in too and probably been like going, well, if you did if you tweaked it this way or you made the game more American or something, But no, you're exactly right. Stay true to who you are, right? Because there is a rich history of Canadian football, right? There's Warren Moon. There's Doug Flutie, guys who are big names in America, right? There's all these really, really great things. You have to stand for something. You have to be unique. And even if, no matter what it is, to stand out in today's market. But going back to what you talked about before, another thing that really, really struck me was the way you kept going back to and referring to the term ambassadors, within, especially ambassadors within your markets. And it really it hit home with me because one of the things that I get accused of pretty regularly is focusing really, really a lot on customers, right? But that's because I come from the school of thought that, like, if you don't have a customer, you don't have anything, right?
That's true. That's so true.
I mean, God forbid. It's a crazy philosophy, right? And what it sounds like is that you've also done a really great job, though, of of taking it and making fan first meaningful, not just a slogan, but actually like, hey, you are a part. This is a community, right? Like in the States, sometimes we've had owners go like, well, this is a community asset, and then they'll do that, maybe move the team or something like this, or something like this. But you, it seems, have captured the essence of being a community asset, and the community asset develops through your ambassadors and your traditions and all of the stories around the team. Or maybe I'm crazy again. Which is usual.
You hit one of the words that you just used right now is community. Like our fans and our teams really are community centric, and we have ambassadors from every team, and our players do a really good job, and with collaboration with our teams and leagues. Our players, I think, we're one of the most accessible type of league in terms of player access possible. Like, you can see our star quarterbacks, our star running backs. They go to their kids go to the same school as your neighborhood kid. They shop at the same grocery store as you shop in. You can run into them, and that's part of what the Canadian Football League is part of the unity and community. And those stories and those traditions or that type of fan access, as part of our story as the Canadian Football League, holds true for when this league has been playing. Like our star quarterbacks, you can see them at your local, Tim Hortons, and they will talk to the fans. They can sit down and have conversations. You can't do that in any other league, from my understanding. And talk about community. We have our high-end corporate ambassadors that not sell the league for us and tell the stories. And you have, when you talk about Doug Flutie and Warren Moon, like those guys were readily accessible within the community, doing a lot of good work with some of our fans and developing the tradition of the Canadian Football League. And that is really, really the fabric of the Canadian Football League. It's just we are a community unity league that has a lot of ambassadors to share our stories, and that will never change. And that brings the fandom, and that's what makes us really, really unique in each of those big marketplaces.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I can't stress it enough that, in a world that has become more and more dominated by digital connections, right?
Yes.
And,
Yep.
and digital transactions, everything digital, right? Like a digital first society in
Yeah.
a lot of ways.
Yeah.
That the personal and the community aspect of a lot of this stuff has become more and more important to people. And sports and live experiences. I know you have a similar belief in like the power of the live experience to build the community
Yes.
that I
Yep.
do, right?
Yep. Yep.
It's just more and more important, and if it's a missed opportunity if you aren't building a community around your building and your team and your events, because this is what people again, if we're talking data, right? Because data work cuts both ways. There's great aspects of it. There's not so great aspects of it. The data's clear. People are investing more of their money and their time and their attention in experiences that bring them together because of how much technology is intruding in their lives in other ways. And if you aren't taking advantage of that, then you are missing an opportunity.
Absolutely.
Now, one of the things that I have been trying to coach my clients through and my partners through and everybody through this year is I want everybody to like focus on opportunities as opposed to like just tackling problems. And being only the second podcast I'm going to have done this year so far, I'm going to ask you this question. What are like one or two opportunities that you hope to take advantage of and capture or work towards this year?
Ooh, that's a great question.
I try to stump you. I should have warned you.
Yeah, you stumped me there a little bit in terms of focusing on opportunities. I think one of the things that's been well, you hit it on it. It's all about the live experiences. I think the opportunities that what I'm covering here at the Canadian Football League, I mean, is really I think is the first time ticket buyer to our games. Now, I think I'm going to get a little bit more granular and tactical here, but I think it's been lost a little bit. A lot of our teams, and I think this goes across the board, is that we put a lot of investment on, rightfully so, our corporate partners, our premium club members, our season ticket holders, and some of the group buyers. But I think with technology now, what we're able to do is really identify the casual fan, the first-time visitor, or the first-time ticket purchaser. And that's where the growth for our league, where I find, is where the opportunity lies. So what are we going to do about that? Well, we need to understand and work with our teams, first of all, to understand who they are and identifying the first and second-time visitors to our venues, or the first-time and second-time ticket purchasers. And the opportunities were how are we going to enhance their experiences to make sure that they become ambassadors. And because a first-time visitor is not going to be your fan ambassador. They're there with a little bit more curiosity, or they're there because they're celebrating an occasion, or they're looking for something to do, and they were drawn to the game. But how are our teams and how, as a league, are we going to enhance those first-time visitors' experiences so they become long-term ambassadors? And I think that's where the opportunity lies for each of our teams and for the league in growth and in terms of revenue. And I think people will understand a little bit more of the Net Promoter Score studies and in terms of getting technical and marketing technical. But we found that the Net Promoter Scores for CFL fans go way up if they attend 3 or more games. But the first and second time visit to the games, our NPS scores are pretty flat or -0. So our opportunity really is to enhance those experiences for the first time and second time visitors to our games to a point where they become ambassadors in the future. I think that's where our opportunity lies. I think a lot of teams and a lot of leagues really don't allocate resources to this fan segment, rightfully so, because they want to, work on the 80-20 rule where they focus on the season ticket holders, premium corporate partners. But I think people are missing out on that casual fan. And I think they've been lost. They've been forgotten about. And I think the opportunity is how to enhance those fan segment experiences. I hope that answers your questions, Dave, but I think that's where the opportunity lies for us.
No, that's a great answer. It's something that I talk about too, because I think even if you're focusing on the big corporate partners or the season ticket holders, all these areas, you also have to recognize that I think I mentioned it earlier when I was talking about the English football fans and the fact that there's, people have a different life cycle for their fandom, right? And there's you're going to have a core group of people who are dedicated no matter what, right? Like,
For sure.
I'm pretty certain that I'm going to be a lifelong Alabama fan that pays attention to Alabama football no matter what. I'm pretty sure I'm going to guarantee that since it's been going on for 30 years now. I'm good. But if you're even within the corporate thing, right? If you're only paying attention to those corporate clients and they're not benefiting from the value of the ticket, right? Which is like, because maybe not everybody that's going is a hardcore fan, then you're missing an opportunity and you're going to constantly need to nurture them. So it seems like to me that you have the thought process is to create a customer life cycle, one that, builds over time. Like, so that even if it's a first time corporate customer who's coming through on their company tickets, it still doesn't mean that you should just neglect them. It means like, hey, if it's your first time, let's make sure that like you get us here a second or third or fourth time, because we know that the value to you is going to increase and improve, and it's going to be extremely valuable to us, because the more people who come the second, third, fourth time and enjoy the experience and continue to enjoy the experience, who become brand ambassadors for us, it's going to make the likelihood of us renewing these more high value, high dollar partnerships and ticket sales more likely. It's going to increase that because, again, if we go back to the camp I fall into, which is like if you don't have a customer, you don't have anything. The other part of that really goes hand in hand is like it's always cheaper to keep a customer you have than it is to go find a new one.
Well, that's the golden rule, right? And I think what I meant by this, I mean, there's other opportunities I can touch on, and we could talk.
I think this is a great one. I think because like the way you explained it, it talks about walking a customer, and it doesn't matter if they're a big one or a small one, having a path forward for them. And because I think that's great. I think you have to teach people that like. Encourage them to be a part of your community. That's what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
You're backing it up with action. That's all. I mean, I think it's great. I don't think you have to explain anything to me.
It's funny. We talk about this all the time around the league office and with their teams. It's like if you look at, a revenue tree for a team or for a league, I talk about this in like with my Tyler, our chief revenue officer, like the root of the revenue tree for a lot of these teams and leagues is ticket sales. So if you're not feeding the root, and part of those roots are your casual ticket buyers and creating an enhanced fan journey experience, those roots will grow into the trees, into the branches, and that brings the value to corporate partnerships, media rights, and food and beverage. If revenues go up if you have more people in the building. But the root is really where, we really need to focus our opportunities on, which are ticket sales and those customers that we talk about and enhancing those experiences, especially the first and second time visitors, because we got to get them through the fan journey into the chain and then build that revenue tree per se. And it starts there. And I think the business that we're in, like you talked about, we're looking at all the essence of technology and all the access and all the things that you can do. But in the end, it's that customer personal experience that needs to be enhanced in order for them to get them through to become a brand ambassador or what have you, and build that revenue tree. And I think it's been lost a little bit, and it's a best practice that I think we need to do that the KM Football League, which I'm an advocate for with our teams, and we're working together to share those best practices. And I think you hit it on right there. It's that if you don't have a customer, you don't have anything. So you have to treat those first-time customers as if they've been long-time customers and making sure they become your ambassadors for the future.
Right, and I think that if you spend enough time focusing on, like you said, the revenue, calling it a revenue tree and talking about what are the roots here, and it's like the customer, you're going to find that the opportunity to grow your revenue and to expand the reach of your organization is going to grow. And I feel that, and this is my opinion, sometimes the emphasis, especially in leagues that are more driven by media rights, is sometimes they forget or miss the opportunities in basic blocking and tackling of ticket selling and creating fans and customers. Because the reason
I totally agree with you. Totally agree with you.
Because, I mean, again, I don't want you to say anything that'll get you into trouble, because if people yell at me and scream at me, it's fine. They yell and scream at me all I want. I don't care. But the thing is it goes with the job. Is that by focusing all of your attention on the media rights, the only reason that the media rights are so valuable is because you have such a dedicated group of customers, of fans that are willing to watch. And I think part of the challenge now that a lot of the leagues that are media driven are finding and struggling with is that because they don't have an attachment to a team or an organization or a city or a community, their fandom is a little bit more fluid, and maybe what's happening, and I don't have the data to back this up, so this is completely a hypothesis, is that the challenge becomes they're accelerating that life cycle so that their churn of customers, either in a passive or somewhat paying attention or really paying attention or devoted, becomes faster, more rapid, and more violent. And it means that, again, go back to one of the first rules, which is it's always cheaper to keep a customer you have than to create a new one. You're constantly spending more money than you need to on trying to gain attention from people who are already stressed out, who are already overwhelmed by data and advertisements and just information coming at them all the time, demanding their attention, and who may, in a lot of cases, have already had an experience with you that was either middling or not great. And so then your first impression that you left isn't the most favorable one. Whereas if you're thoughtful and you build it from the ground up, it creates a more stable fan environment, a more stable league, and it helps you grow revenue over the long term. But that's me. And Dave, and that was as long a monologue as you're going to get out of me.
Yeah, well, you know what? That is you hit it on the nose. And I mean, I'm speaking to from my lens. I mean, if you talk to a lot of my colleagues in other departments, there are several opportunities we want to focus on. But through my lens, I think that's where we start, and that's where we want to help our teams focus on a little bit and allocate some of their resources to. And I think overall that will drive what we just talked about, driving revenues for the long term. And I think that's just my lens. The CFL is working on many other opportunities. We talked about, we call it the CFL 2.0 strategy. I think you saw it a little bit this weekend where we had a player combine and first draft in Mexico with our strategic partnership with the La Liga Football Association in Mexico, the LFA. That's one opportunity that we're looking at in terms of international expansion. So there's that opens up a whole new doors. We're exploring other opportunities in the esports arena and, of course, gambling arena. So there's other opportunities, but what at its core, through my lens, our opportunities is with our first-time and second-time visitors, where we can start growing and enhance those experiences. So that's where I think a lot of it is, because that's where I think a lot of the CFL is focusing on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you guys are, if you're focusing on doing the best, creating something that's valuable for your customers and creating an opportunity for your customers to feel part of a community, I don't want to say you can't do any wrong, because you still could, but I think you're traveling down a really wise path, because I think that if you're focused today on building communities and building connections and creating something that is worthwhile for your customers, then you're putting yourself at a great advantage over a lot of other places.
You know what? And I'll expand that point a little bit more, Dave. When you talk about connection, and you touched on this before with digital connection, we want a personal community. And that's what we're striving for, is that we want to make sure that it's not just a connection to our fans or to our customers. It's a personal connection. It's a more intimate connection to the community, to the Canadian Football League. And that's something that we definitely will strive for, and that's where the opportunity lies.
Well, I think that may be a good place to leave it, because I don't think I can top personal community. Jason, where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter at Team JMags, or on Facebook with my full name, Jason Maglantay. My email is jmaglantay@cfl.ca, so feel free to connect with me. I love to talk about anything and everything, sports business, even just, shooting anything. And if you have advice on what to wear in minus 26 degrees Celsius weather, I'd be more than happy to entertain any advice. So let's chat, and I hope to hear from any one of you. And I'm always in a position of learning. I always want to learn more and more. So, if there's anything I said today, if there's anything more you want to add or critique or provide feedback, don't hesitate. I would really love to hear from your audience, Dave. And again, continue all the great work. And I sincerely appreciate the time of having me on your podcast.
No, this was great. I think people are going to learn a lot from this.
Thanks again for listening to my talk with Jason Maglantay from the Canadian Football League. As always, I hope you are learning a lot from the business of fun. And if you want to find out more about what I'm up to, visit my website. It's www.davewakeman.com. You can find my blog, my calendar, my client list, all kinds of stuff going on. I got some really great partnerships and new things that are coming out over the next couple weeks and months that will make visiting my website much more valuable. If you like what I'm doing on the podcast, I would love it if you'd subscribe. As I told you at the beginning of the podcast, you can find me on iTunes. You can find us on Stitcher, I think SoundCloud. I think we're pretty much on all the big podcast platforms now. So subscribe, and if you're so inclined, rate it. It helps people discover it. It helps people find out what we're doing, and it helps make sure that I can continue to deliver really great content for you and really great conversations like the one we just had with Jason. If you're really, really interested, I'd love it if you share it on the internet or pass it along to your colleagues and your friends. I mean, any way that you can support the podcast I'm really grateful for. And finally, I want to thank my friends at Booking Protect who so graciously sponsor the podcast. Any listing, any sector, anywhere, Booking Protect is the global leader in refund protection. They offer the most comprehensive refund protection product of anywhere in the world. Their 5-star Trustpilot rating is the highest in the industry, and the benefits of working with Booking Protect go far beyond just offering refund protection. It helps your customers have greater peace of mind in their purchases. It helps improve the buying journey. It helps give your customers the chance to customize their purchases. And for you and your organization, it is a new stream of revenue. So check out Booking Protect at www.bookingprotect.com. Talk to Simon, talk to Kat, talk to any of the people there about how working with Booking Protect can provide you with another resource in your efforts to expand your ability to sell and market to your customers and to give them more incentives to buy. And until next time, thanks for listening again. I'll talk to you soon. Take it easy.